Hi everyone, I'm back to read the next chapter, chapter 3 called To Town at Last, in Kirsten's book 3, about Christmas time from 1854. On Tuesday, Kirsten woke to the sound of voices. Except for the fire in the stove, the cabin was so dark and cold that she could see her breath. From her bed, she saw that thick ice covered the little window. Peter and Lars still slept, their heads almost hidden under the covers. But Mama and Papa were up. They sat at the pine table, talking softly. Kirsten stayed under her quilt and listened. "We finished putting up the snow fences yesterday," Papa said. "I think we were just in time. It looks like we'll have another heavy snow soon. But I could drive into town today. Olav won't need the horse. What do you think? If it's safe to go, you should try. One more hard snow and the roads will be blocked until spring," Mama said. "Will you pack me a lunch then? I'll leave as soon as the milking is done and be back with the trunks before supper time," Papa said. The trunks! Now Kirsten was wide awake, her heart pounding. Tomorrow was St. Lucia Day. They would get the trunks just in time. She was out of her bed with a leap, and she ran across the rough boards of the cabin floor and threw her arms around Mama's neck. "Oh, Mama, please may I go along in the wagon to get our trunks? It doesn't matter if I miss one day of school." Papa was already pulling on his heavy boots. "There's too much snow for the wagon. I'm going to hitch Blackie to the sleigh, and there's not much room in that small sleigh, Kirsten." "But I don't take up much room," Kirsten cried. "It's a long drive. You'll get cold." "Go to school with your brothers," Papa said. "But I want to go with you more than anything in the world, Papa." "Do you want to come with me that much?" Papa asked. "What will you do?" "I can help you, I'm sure of it. I can keep you company so that you won't get lonely," Kirsten said. "Please say yes." She thought Papa might scowl because he didn't like to be urged to change his mind. But instead he laughed. "You have a strong will, Kirsten, just like your mama. You may come with me. Eat your breakfast and dress in your warmest clothes. Then bring in a bunch of snow so Mama will have water today. I'll hitch up the sleigh and we'll be on our way. Hurry now." Kirsten hurried. She put on 2 pairs of wool stockings, all of her quilted petticoats, her heaviest sweater, and a shawl. As she ate her pancakes, she watched Mama pack a lunch in the hamper and heat stones in the oven. The warm stones would keep Kirsten and Papa's feet cozy in the sleigh. The first rays of light came through the clouds as Papa brought the sleigh from the barn. Kirsten climbed into the sleigh beside Papa, and Mama handed her the food hamper. "Here's your lunch, and I'll put in a loaf of Christmas bread for you to give Mr. Burkhoff at the store. We might not see him again until spring. Tell him we wish him a happy Christmas." Mama stood by the gate and waved as the sleigh pulled away down the road. "Take care," she called after them. Blackie whined and stamped. The harness bells around his neck jingled merrily. Kirsten laughed with pleasure when she heard the bells. She remembered the wonderful holidays in Sweden, the sleigh bells they'd taken to church and to the homes of their friends. Snow was falling as Kirsten and Papa left the farm. The snowflakes settled on Blackie's back like moths and caught in Kirsten's eyelashes. Papa turned the horse east toward the small town of Maryville. Now the wind was at their backs. Under a fur blanket, Kirsten was snug by Papa's side. Papa's wide-brimmed hat was pulled low. He wore his sheepskin mittens with high tops that came up over his jacket cuffs, and a red scarf Mama had knitted for him. As they slid along, he began to sing a Christmas carol. His deep voice seemed to fill up his whole chest and push ahead of them through the softly falling snow. Kirsten sang too. She was happy. In no time they'd pick up the trunks and be back at the farm. Then tomorrow morning before dawn, she and Elizabeth and Anna would surprise everyone with a St. Lucia celebration. Their plans were turning out perfectly after all. By the time they reached Maryville, it was snowing harder. The soft snow made caps on the tops of the fence posts and piled up on the shingled rooftops. Kirsten and Papa drove past houses and church and the sawmill, then stopped in front of Burkhoff's general store. While Papa unhitched Blackie from the sleigh, Kirsten watched the men and women in the street. She was glad to smell wood smoke in the air and to hear people greeting one another. Maryville was only a little town, but it was a happy bustle. Inside the store, the delicious scents of spices, new cloth, oiled leather, and sausages reached Kirsten's nose all at once. Mr. Burkhoff stood beside the scales, weighing sugar. When he saw Kirsten and Papa, he wiped his hands off on his white apron and came around the counter to shake Papa's hand. He gave Kirsten a piece of hard sugar candy from one of the glass jars. "It's not Christmas yet, but have a little treat," he said. Kirsten handed him the loaf of Christmas bread that Mama had sent. "Mama sends you a Merry Christmas greeting," she said, "and thank you for the candy." Oops. Mr. Burkhoff raised his white eyebrows. "Kirsten Larson, the last time you were in my store, you spoke to me in Swedish." Kirsten felt herself blush. "I'm learning English." "So you are, and you speak it very well too," Mr. Burkhoff said. "Thank your mother for the bread." "We're here to pick up our trunks," Papa said. "Come with me," Mr. Burkhoff said. He took them to a big storage room at the back of the store. Wooden boxes and barrels were piled clear up to the ceiling. Mr. Burkhoff brushed aside some crates to let Kirsten and Papa through. There by the back door, they saw the two big trunks with Anders Larson painted on the sides. Papa slapped the trunks with his open hand the way he slapped the cows. "Well, Kirsten, here are our things at last." Kirsten leaned against the painted trunk. She traced the flower paintings with her fingertip. Sorry was in this trunk, right there under the lid. The white nightdress and red sash she needed for St. Lucia Day would be near all of Mama's lovely weavings. And at the bottom of the trunk, there were heavy woolen sweaters, caps, mittens, and the shiny brass candlesticks. Oh, everything was in this trunk. It seemed like an old dear friend Kirsten had met again after a long time. She pressed her cheek against the rounded top. "Papa, let's open the trunk now," she said. "I want to hold Sorry on the sleigh ride home." Papa and Mr. Burkhoff pushed the trunks out the back door onto the loading platform. "We'll open the trunks when we get home," Papa said. "And we've got to go right now. It's snowing harder, and we have a long drive back home." Mr. Burkhoff squinted up at the snow. "Maybe you folks should stay here until the snow stops, Mr. Larson." "Thank you," Papa said, "but I think we'll leave now before the snow gets heavier." "Don't get lost," Mr. Burkhoff warned. "This looks like it will be a storm." He lifted Kirsten into the sleigh beside Papa. "Merry Christmas," Kirsten called back to Mr. Burkhoff as Papa drove the sleigh away from the store. Mr. Burkhoff's answering call was muffled by the thud of Blackie's steps in the snow. "Merry Christmas to you too." Okay, chapter 4 is called Braving the Blizzard. As they left Maryville in the loaded sleigh, the snow seemed to fall harder every minute. It stung Kirsten's cheeks until she pulled her shawl up over her nose. Papa urged Blackie faster, but now the horse had the extra weight of the trunks to pull, and the sleigh didn't skim along as it had done before. "Look at that sky," Papa said. "The weather changed while we waited in the store." When the road turned west toward the farm, Kirsten saw that the sleigh tracks they'd made earlier were filling with snow. The strong wind drove the snow directly into their faces. There was no way to hide from it. "Pull the blanket over your head," Papa told Kirsten. She curled up next to Papa's side and buried her face under his arm. She could hear the thump of Papa's heart and the muffled jingle of the sleigh bells on as Blackie trotted along. The next time Kirsten peeked out over the edge of the blanket, all she could see was white. Snow whirled up from the fields like spray blown from the tops of waves. Drifts shifted and moved as Blackie stepped along. Papa's beard was filled with snow. His mustache was white with it. His eyes were blue slits under the snow-caked eyebrows. "Where's the road, Papa?" Kirsten asked. "I can't see it." "We're following the fence posts." "Blackie can find his way, though. He's a smart horse," Papa said. "Do you think we should go back to Maryville?" "We've already come a long way. I think there's a better chance the horse knows his way to the farm. If we just keep heading west, we'll be all right." But Papa frowned into the fiercely blowing snow. Kirsten was worried. She'd heard stories about settlers who lost their way in blizzards and walked in circles until they fell down. She'd heard about a boy who froze to death when he got lost between the barn and his house. A snowstorm on the plains was as dangerous as a storm on the ocean. Blackie's harness bells sounded faint and lost. His ears were down, his head low. Papa urged him to keep going, but the horse often stumbled in the moving drifts. Kirsten's feet were so cold she could barely move her toes. Under her feet, she felt the stones that Mama had heated that morning. The warmth had long since gone out of them. "Toss the stones out of the sleigh," Papa told her. "We should make the load lighter. The trunks are heavier than I remembered." "But we won't leave our trunks in the snow, will we?" Kirsten asked. Papa patted her knee. "No, we won't leave our trunks. This snow will let up soon. You'll see." He slapped the reins against Blackie's back, which was thickly covered with snow. Then there were no more fence posts to follow. They drove along beside the dim shadow that Kirsten knew was the edge of the forest, but Blackie walked more slowly and more slowly. Often Papa had to flick the whip across his back to keep him moving. "He wants to turn his back to the wind," Papa said, "but we have to go straight into the wind if we're going to get back to the farm." "Keep going, Blackie," Kirsten shouted. Her words seemed to disappear into the snow and wind. All at once, Blackie stopped. He wouldn't move. "Yo!" Papa yelled. "Get up there!" It was no use. The horse wouldn't take a single step. "What's wrong with him?" Kirsten asked. "He loses his footing in the snow, and that frightens him," Papa said. "I'll have to lead him to keep him moving." Papa handed Kirsten the reins, wrapped the blanket tightly around her waist, and climbed down from the sleigh. He stepped through snowdrifts to Blackie's head and took hold of his bridle. "Come on, Blackie. Come along now." Papa made his voice both gruff and soothing. The horse took one step, stopped, then took another. The bells jingled again. Kirsten realized she'd been holding her breath. She let it out with a sigh. Blackie trusted Papa. Now they'd keep going toward home. They went slowly, step by difficult step. Papa climbed through the knee-high drifts. Even though he was only a few feet in front of her, Kirsten could hardly see him. He was completely covered with snow. Papa pulled Blackie's bridle and Kirsten slapped Blackie's flanks with the reins. The snow and cold made Kirsten lightheaded. Sometimes it seemed the sleigh wasn't moving at all. Only the snow seemed to move, like water running through a stream. Then Papa stumbled. He went down on his knee and cried out. Kirsten had never heard Papa cry out in pain before, and the sound was colder than the wind. "Papa," she shouted. "Papa, are you all right?" She jumped out of the sleigh. The snow came up to her hips, but Kirsten pushed through it to her Papa's side. Papa tried to stand, but again he went down in the snow. "What's the matter, Papa?" "My knee. I twisted my knee. I can't put my weight on it," he said. His face was very pale, his lips white. There was ice in his mustache. "And what can I do?" Kirsten begged him. "Nothing, Kirsten. It's up to Blackie now," Papa answered. "We can't stop here. We have to reach shelter." He dragged himself back to the sleigh, breathing hard. Kirsten wondered how he would ever get back into the high front seat. At last, Papa managed to crawl up. Then he reached down to help Kirsten up beside him. But when he snapped the whip over Blackie's back, the horse wouldn't budge. "It's no good," Papa said. "With no one to lead him, he'll stay right here." Kirsten grabbed Papa's hand. "But I can lead Blackie," she said. "You stay in the sleigh, and I'll walk beside him. Do you think you could walk through the deep snow?" "I'll try, Papa." Papa brushed the snow off Kirsten's shoulder and tied her shawl more tightly over her nose and mouth. Then he pulled off his sheepskin mittens and put them on her hands. Inside Papa's mittens, the fleece was warm and dry. Kirsten's cold hands felt like rabbits creeping into a snug home. "You're a good girl, Kirsten," Papa said. "You have heart." Papa told Mama she had heart when she agreed to come here to America. He told Papa she had heart when she was sick on the ship, but didn't lose hope. Kirsten wanted to be as brave as Mama. She pulled herself along Blackie's side. She shook the harness and made the bell sound. "Yo," she cried in the biggest voice she could manage. "Yo, Blackie, come along." To her surprise, the horse's head came up and he followed her. But the going was hard. Kirsten's feet slipped and the drifts were up to her knees, and now her feet were so numb she couldn't even wiggle her toes. Like the horse, she bent her head into the wind and concentrated on just one step, then the next, then the next. Snow caked on her lips. "Keep going," she told herself. "Have heart, Kirsten." But she didn't know where she was going. The whole world was a white, blowing snowdrift, and it would soon be dark. Then how would they ever find the way home? Kirsten tried to imagine their home, the little snug cabin somewhere in the storm. It would be warm there. She imagined Mama making soup for supper. She imagined Elizabeth and Anna waiting to make the St. Lucia Day surprise. "Keep going," Kirsten told herself. She tried to sing a Christmas carol to keep her spirits up, but her lips were so cold she could barely move them. Instead, she began to count the way Miss Winston drilled numbers in school. 1, 2, 3, 4. That was 4 steps closer to home. 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 steps closer to home. Kirsten was glad she'd learned her numbers. Maybe the numbers would keep her moving. 9, 10, 11. She bumped into something. She fell against Blackie's side and looked around. They weren't in the fields near the forest anymore. They were near some rocks. "We've come the wrong way," Papa called. "The horse has taken us into a valley by the stream. He's lost." Kirsten shielded her eyes from the snow to look. She knew where they were. Blackie hadn't come the wrong way at all. These were the cliffs she'd gone to with Singing Bird, her Indian friend. There was the forked birch tree bent over by the wind. She knew that tree. She'd passed it on her way to the cave where she and Singing Bird had sometimes played. Kirsten struggled back to Papa. She reached up and grabbed his hand. "I know where we are, Papa." "How can you know where we are, Kirsten? The horse has lost his way." "I've been here," Kirsten cried. "You've been here?" "Where are we?" Papa asked. "We're beside a cliff. There's a tiny cave nearby," Kirsten pointed. Papa looked up at the cliff. "How far to the cave?" "It's only a little way, and there's dry wood inside. We can stay there until the storm is over," Kirsten said. Papa tried to stand, but his leg gave way and he sat down again. "Can you take care of Blackie?" he asked. "Yes, I'm sure I can." "Then unharness him from the sleigh and lead him to that clump of birch trees. He'll rest there and be glad of it." Groaning, Papa crawled down from the sleigh. He sat on the snow and pushed himself backwards, inching up the slope toward the opening of the cave. As Papa climbed, Kirsten took Blackie's harness off. It was hard to do it to do in Papa's big mittens, so she pulled one off and held it in her teeth while she worked at the buckle. Blackie followed her a few yards to the shelter of a clump of trees. As she tied his reins to the birch tree, he whinnied. Kirsten brushed the snow from his forelock and his face. Good old Blackie, you have heart. Do you know that? You're a very good, brave horse. Then she followed Papa up the path to the cave. Inside, the cave was dry and not very deep. Near the back was a pile of dry sticks and grass, and the black traces of campfires the Indians had made. Singing Bird had said that they sometimes stayed here when they were hunting. Papa twisted a handful of dry grass. Then he laid dried sticks over it. He chipped at a piece of stone with his flint until he got sparks, and a tiny flame began in the dry grass. Papa blew gently, and the sticks caught fire. Kirsten brought a large branch and laid it by the little fire. First, we must warm up your feet, Kirsten. Take off your boots, Papa said. He leaned against the dry wall of the cave. Kirsten spread the blanket next to Papa, sat down, and loosened her bootlaces. Then she got her boots off. Papa began to rub her feet gently with his warm hands. Soon her toes started to tingle. She knew it was a good sign that they hurt. They weren't frozen. Papa took off his own boots now and put a thick log on the fire. When did you come to this cave? He asked her. But Kirsten didn't want to tell him about Singing Bird and the Indians. She said, I was exploring along the streams and I found it. Did you have permission to be so far from the farm? Papa asked sternly. Kirsten shook her head. No, Papa. I wandered farther than I thought. The ice was melting from Papa's beard, and she saw that he smiled at her. I'm glad that you're a little explorer, Kirsten. I'm glad you found this cave. Do you think you can find your way back to the farm from here? I think so, Papa. Then lie back and rest, Papa said. There's nothing we can do until it stops snowing, and you must be very, very tired. Now that they were resting, Kirsten realized she was hungry. She was too exhausted to climb down the path and get what was left of their lunch from the sleigh. But in her pocket she found a piece of sugar candy Mr. Burkhoff had given her at the general store. The candy was shaped like a Christmas bell. She put it in her mouth and lay beside Papa. The last thing she knew before she fell into a deep sleep was the taste of cinnamon and sugar on her tongue. All right, and next time we will read Chapter 5, Silent Night, Lucia Night.